In 1820, the most exclusive destination for British travelers was a country called Poyais. According to the guidebooks, it was a paradise where the rivers flowed over globules of pure gold, and the soil was so fertile you could harvest corn 3 times a year. The capital city, St. Joseph, boasted a grand opera house, a domed cathedral, and wide paved boulevards. It had its own currency, its own flag, and a government recognized by the financial elite of London. But if you followed the coordinates on that map, there was no opera house. There wasn't even a road. Just a sweltering, mosquito-infested swamp. Poyais was a ghost nation, a phantom. It never existed. Yet, the belief that it was real was strong enough to convince hundreds of people to sail to their deaths. This is the story of history's most audacious con, and the man who sold a kingdom built entirely on ink and paper. Welcome to Null Coordinates, a channel that documents the world that isn't there. In this investigation, we are tracking a deadly, manufactured paradise, a mirage that lured hundreds of hopeful pioneers to their ruin on a desolate shore. To understand how a deception of this magnitude is possible, you have to understand the man who engineered it. Gregor MacGregor was not a nobody. He was a master of perceived authority. By the time he arrived in London, he was already Sir Gregor MacGregor, a Scottish clan chief and a general in the Venezuelan War of Independence. He wore flamboyant uniforms covered in medals, some earned, many simply invented. He was married to the cousin of Simon Bolivar, the legendary liberator of South America. He understood a fundamental flaw in human psychology. If you look the part, if you have the right accent, the right uniform, and the right connections, almost nobody will bother to check the paperwork. MacGregor didn't just steal money. He was an architect of reality. He understood a terrifying truth. If you want to sell a massive, unthinkable lie, you need to bore people with excruciating detail. He published a 350-page guidebook titled Sketch of the Mosquito Shore, written under the pseudonym Thomas Strangeways. It was a masterpiece of fiction, citing non-existent geography and detailing a complex, tricameral parliamentary system designed to bore people into trusting him. He printed thousands of Poyaisian dollar bills, which he exchanged for real British sterling. He even gamified the scam, selling commissions in the Poyaisian army. For a price, the younger sons of British nobility could become lieutenants and captains in a military force that had 0 soldiers. He created a world so detailed, so bureaucratic, and so dull that it felt irrefutable. The tragedy began in earnest in late 1822. The first ship, the Honduras packet, set sail from London carrying 70 hopeful settlers. These were not just greedy speculators. They were doctors, bankers, and farmers looking for a new life. They were followed shortly by the Kennersley Castle, carrying another 200 men, women, and children. The mood on board was electric. They believed they were sailing to a civilized European-style capital in the tropics. They had swapped their life savings for Poyaisian land grants and worthless currency. The cinematic horror of this story lies in the arrival. Put yourself on the wooden deck of that ship. You've traded your life savings for this moment. You're scanning the horizon for the gleaming stone spires of the St. Joseph Cathedral. But as the anchor drops, silence. Nothing but an unbroken, desolate wall of green. There was no city. There were only 2 bamboo huts and a few empty rum bottles left by previous transients. The realization did not happen all at once. It settled in slowly, like the malaria that would soon ravage the camp. The settlers waited, assuming the pilot boat was late. When it became clear that no one was coming, they tried to set up camp in the mud. The suffering was absolute. Among them was a Scottish cobbler, proudly holding papers appointing him the official shoemaker to the Princess of Poyais. When the delusion finally shattered, When he realized there was no princess, no city, and no hope, he walked down to that swampy shore and took his own life. Eventually, a ship from Belize spotted the survivors. When the British officials tracked down the actual king of the Mosquito Coast, a local leader named George Frederick Augustus, he clarified the situation simply. He said that MacGregor had given him rum and jewelry, but he had given MacGregor nothing. The land grant was void. Of the roughly 250 people who sailed to find paradise, 180 died of starvation and disease. You might think this is where the story ends, with MacGregor in chains. But this is where the story shifts from a tragedy to a psychological thriller. When the few skeletal survivors returned to London, the press exploded with outrage. MacGregor, sensing the heat, did not turn himself in. He simply moved to Paris. And there, incredibly, he did it again. He started the same marketing campaign, selling land in the non-existent country of Poyais to the French. He was months away from sending another ship of doomed settlers when the French government intervened. And here is the ultimate irony. The man who built an empire on fake paperwork wasn't brought down by a brilliant detective. He was brought down by bureaucrats. French clerks simply noticed a spike in passport applications for a country they couldn't find on a map. They raided his office and threw him in jail. Yet, the most baffling aspect of the Poyais scheme is the reaction of the victims. Back in London, even as the newspapers published the grim death tolls, many of the survivors defended MacGregor. They sued the journalists for libel. They blamed the ship's captain, the weather, or the geography. They blamed everyone but the Prince of Poyais. This is a powerful example of cognitive dissonance. To admit MacGregor was a fraud was to admit that they had sacrificed their families and fortunes for a fairy tale. It was a truth too painful to bear. Gregor MacGregor was never convicted of these crimes in Britain. After a brief imprisonment in France, he returned to London and continued selling Poyais bonds for another decade. Eventually, he retired to Venezuela, where his early military service was still remembered fondly. He was reinstated as a general, granted a pension, and when he died in 1845, he was buried with full military honors in the Caracas Cathedral. The man who sent 180 people to their deaths searching for an opera house in a malaria-infested swamp died a hero. His story remains a dark testament to a singular truth about human nature. We don't only buy products, and we rarely buy facts. We buy better versions of ourselves. And the more beautiful the lie, the harder it is to wake up. Next time, we investigate a map drawn from a mirage, Crockerland, a phantom continent that lured an entire expedition into the freezing Arctic, only to dissolve before their very eyes. This is Null Coordinates.